Late one night in Denmark's Elsinore Castle, the guards on watch are visited by Horatio, an old friend of the young Prince Hamlet. For the past 2 nights, the guards swear that they have seen a ghost stalking the castle walls in full armor, and not just an ordinary ghost either. The spooky figure looks exactly like Hamlet's father, the late king who has recently died. As a scholar, Horatio is pretty skeptical of the guard's story, but sure enough, that same night, the king's ghost appears once again. Horatio works up the courage to call out to it, but the ghost seems unwilling or unable to talk to them, so they decide that the best course of action is to fill Hamlet in on what they have witnessed, and see if the king will speak to him instead. Now that we know that the old king of Denmark is dead, we might assume that his son, Hamlet, would have ascended the throne in his place. But, in a suspicious twist, it is actually the king's brother, Claudius, who wears the crown, after marrying his widow Gertrude not 2 months after his passing. Understandably, this is pretty upsetting to Hamlet, who not only lost a beloved father, but also has to stomach seeing his mother remarried to his uncle straight afterwards. Despite his questionable actions, Claudius is not an incompetent ruler, as he is in the midst of handling a potential threat to their country in the form of Fortinbras, the Norwegian prince who is on a revenge mission to take back the lands his father lost in a war with Denmark. However, Hamlet is too emotional to acknowledge Claudius's good qualities, and feels only hatred and resentment towards both him and his mother for tainting the memory of his father. So when Horatio reveals to him that his father's ghost has been haunting the castle walls, he jumps at the opportunity to get some closure by seeing him in person. Meanwhile, the king's nosy counselor Polonius is bidding farewell to his son Laertes, who is about to depart for France. Before he leaves, Laertes warns his sister Ophelia against falling in love with Hamlet, as he believes the prince's higher status would prevent him from ever marrying her. Polonius wholeheartedly agrees with Laertes on this point, and orders Ophelia to reject Hamlet's love letters and to just stay away from him in general. That night, Hamlet meets up with Horatio and the guards on the castle battlements to wait for the appearance of the king's ghost. Against their advice, he goes off to speak with his father alone, not caring at this point whether he lives or dies. This time the ghost has a lot to say, stating that he wants Hamlet to avenge his murder, and not just any murder, murder most foul. Shocked and horrified, Hamlet listens as his father reveals that he was killed by none other than the sly Claudius, who poured a vial of particularly nasty poison in his ear while he slept. Since he already strongly dislikes his uncle anyway, Hamlet doesn't need to be told twice to take revenge on him, but the ghost urges him not to do anything bad to his mother, as she will be judged in the afterlife. Shaken by what he has just seen and heard, Hamlet decides that further investigation is needed before he takes action, and makes the questionable choice to pretend to be mad while he tries to prove his uncle's guilt. Putting his plan into action, Hamlet begins to act strangely in front of the king and queen, but particularly towards Ophelia, which leads Polonius to believe that the reason for his madness is an unrequited love for his daughter. He arranges to spy on the two of them together with Claudius so that he can see it for himself. The king is not convinced, however, and sends for Hamlet's old school friends, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, to see if they can figure out what is wrong with him. Their arrival at Elsinore Castle coincides with a troupe of players, or actors, which prompts Hamlet to plot a clever trap for the king to prove that he is guilty of regicide. He asks them to perform a play which almost exactly replicates the murder of his father, so that he can watch Claudius and judge his reaction. If his trap works, Hamlet feels confident that he will be able to take revenge on his uncle without remorse. Although Hamlet's madness was just supposed to be an act, the stress of the situation seems to be taking a toll on him, and he even begins to contemplate suicide. While Polonius and Claudius watch in secret, Ophelia meets up with Hamlet and tries to return his letters and gifts, which he then denies ever sending her. Confusingly, he tells Ophelia that he never loved her, and orders her to get to a nunnery so she doesn't become a breeder of sinners. With all evidence pointing to the contrary, Polonius still believes his behavior is a consequence of unrequited love, but Claudius does not agree. He also questions whether Hamlet is really mad at all, and decides that the best course of action is to send the prince away to England, where he will be less of a threat. That night, the troupe of actors perform for the royal court, and according to Hamlet's instructions, play out a scene which very closely mirrors his father's murder. Sure enough, Claudius becomes very distressed and makes a quick exit, which proves his guilt in Hamlet's eyes. Gertrude, who is confused and upset by his behavior, summons her son to her chambers to tell him off. But on the way, he spies Claudius on his knees trying to pray for forgiveness for the terrible sin he has committed. This seems like the perfect opportunity to exact his revenge, but Hamlet stops himself from killing him, as he realizes it is unfair that he should get to die in a moment where he's just made things right with God, because his father is never given the chance. When he arrives at his mother's chambers, she tries to rebuke him for his actions, but he quickly turns the tables on her and aggressively berates her for insulting his father's memory by marrying his brother so soon after his death. He speaks to her so harshly, however, that Polonius, who is indulging his favorite pastime by spying on their meeting behind a tapestry, calls out for help. Believing that he is Claudius, Hamlet stabs the eavesdropper through the fabric and he falls down dead. He doesn't seem too sad about having killed him though, and leaves his mother's chambers dragging Polonius's corpse behind him. After these gruesome events, Hamlet is sent away to England with Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, but the sneaky Claudius soon reveals that his real motive is to have him killed. He sends a letter with Hamlet's friends to his ally, the King of England, ordering him to execute Hamlet on sight. Meanwhile, Laertes, Polonius's son, returns from France, confused and furious about his father's death and seeking revenge. He is greeted with even more bad news, however, as his sister Ophelia has gone mad as a result of her father's sudden murder and Hamlet's cruel treatment of her. Spying an opportunity here, Claudius uses Laertes' grief against him by revealing that Hamlet is to blame for all this tragedy. At this point, a messenger arrives with news that a pirate attack has taken place on Hamlet's ship, and that the young prince is on his way back to Denmark. This was definitely not a part of Claudius's plan, so he quickly pivots and arranges for Hamlet and Laertes to fight a duel when he gets back. He ensures that Hamlet will not escape death this time, however, as Laertes' blade will be dipped in poison, and he will also be served a poisoned drink during the match, just to cement his fate. Their plotting is interrupted by the arrival of Gertrude, who brings the sad news that Ophelia has drowned, although whether this happened by accident or by suicide is unclear. This latest addition to Laertes' pile of grief only heightens his lust for revenge, and the stage is now set for Hamlet's impending return. Hamlet is now back in Denmark, and meets up with the trusty Horatio in a graveyard, where two gravediggers are discussing whether Ophelia should be buried according to Christian rites if her drowning was indeed a suicide. As they dig her grave, they uncover the skull of Yorick, the king's jester whom Hamlet knew as a child. Seeing his undignified end causes Hamlet to contemplate the overall futility of life, and the irony that everyone ends up in the same place no matter who they are. When he realizes that the grave is for Ophelia, however, he interrupts the funeral, claiming that he loved her the most out of everyone. Laertes is understandably incensed by this, and tries to strangle Hamlet until they are separated. Later on, Hamlet fills Horatio in on the details of what happened during his journey to England. Before the pirate attack, he discovered the letter Claudius wrote to the king ordering his execution, and decided to thwart his uncle's plot by forging a new letter in Claudius's handwriting that tells the king to kill Rosencrantz and Guildenstern instead. A messenger now arrives with Laertes' challenge for a duel, which Hamlet accepts, unaware of what awaits him. While the king, queen, and royal court watch, the rigged duel begins, with Laertes using his poisoned sword. The two men are fairly well matched, but while they fight, Gertrude takes a drink from the poisoned glass which was meant for Hamlet before Claudius can stop her. Laertes successfully wounds Hamlet with his sword, but in the scuffle, they somehow manage to get their weapons mixed up, and Hamlet now wounds Laertes with the deadly blade. At this moment, the poison takes effect for Gertrude, who falls down crying out that she has been poisoned. Since the jig is now up, Laertes, realizing that he is doomed as well, reveals the conniving plan that he and Claudius made before the duel. Hamlet is not about to die without taking his revenge on Claudius, so he makes sure to stab his uncle with a poisoned sword as well, killing him almost immediately. Before they too die, Hamlet and Laertes make amends, and Hamlet tells Horatio that Fortinbras, who is making his way to the castle with his army, should be the next king of Denmark. Right on cue, Fortinbras enters this bloody scene with an ambassador from England who brings the news that Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead. Astonished by the horrific sight he has walked into, Fortinbras orders Hamlet's body to be displayed in a position of honor like a soldier, while Horatio begins to relay the tragic tale of the young prince of Denmark.